The night was quiet except for the rustle of leaves underfoot. A single mother named Clara had taken a longer route home, clutching the grocery bag that held just enough for dinner. The woods near the edge of town were not her usual path, but tonight she needed to save time. Bills were piling up, her little boy was waiting, and she told herself the darkness was nothing to fear. Yet something about the silence pressed down on her, heavier than the sack in her arms. Halfway down the trail, she stopped. At first she thought it was an animal stirring, maybe a fox or a raccoon, but the sound was different. Muffled, uneven, desperate. It was the sound of someone struggling to breathe. She froze, her heart hammering, unsure if she should move closer or run. For a moment her instincts screamed to protect herself. She had too much to lose, her child, her fragile stability, the fragile balance of survival. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, tugged at her feet and carried her forward. The beam of her phone's flashlight cut through the undergrowth. That was when she saw it, disturbed earth, a patch of soil darker and fresher than the rest. Something beneath it shifted, her breath caught in her throat. For a second she wondered if she had stumbled upon some nightmare scene better left undiscovered. But then she heard it clearly, a weak groan followed by a cough. Clara dropped the groceries, the sound of cans rolling across the dirt echoing in the night. She dropped to her knees and clawed at the soil, her hands trembling yet relentless. Each handful revealed more, a shoulder, a jacket smeared with mud, a face barely visible but unmistakably human. His eyes fluttered, lips cracked and pale, struggling to form words that came out as nothing but air. Her mind raced. Who would bury a man alive? How long had he been there, and who was he? His suit, though ruined, was expensive. His watch gleamed faintly under the thin light. This wasn't someone ordinary, but none of that mattered to Clara in that moment. She dug harder, driven by something primal, something fierce. Dirt clogged her nails, sweat mixed with tears, yet she kept going, whispering encouragement to a stranger who couldn't hear her. The man's chest heaved faintly when she cleared enough for him to breathe. Relief washed over her like a tide, but there was no time to pause. She tugged at his arm, dragging him up inch by inch, her strength fueled by adrenaline she didn't know she had. The earth resisted, heavy and merciless, but she fought back. Pulling him from the grave meant to be his final resting place. When his body finally collapsed onto the ground beside her, Clara staggered back, gasping. The forest stood silent again, as if holding its breath, as if witnessing something too fragile to disturb. The man's eyes opened slightly, unfocused, and for the first time Clara realized she wasn't just saving a stranger. She was standing at the edge of something far larger than herself. Clara's hands were raw, her palms burning from clawing through dirt and roots, but she couldn't stop. The man beside her wheezed weakly, his breaths uneven, rasping like sandpaper against her ears. His chest barely rose, and each second he remained motionless on the forest floor deepened the terror in her veins. She had pulled him free, but the fight to keep him alive had only just begun. She pressed her trembling fingers against his throat, searching for a pulse. At first there was nothing. Panic surged, tightening her chest, but then, faint, so faint, she felt it. A fragile thump, irregular, but there. Her relief lasted only an instant before the enormity of the situation crashed over her. She was alone in the woods with a man who had been buried alive. Whoever had done this could still be nearby. She needed to act quickly. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice shaking, though she knew he might not even hear. She adjusted his head, brushing away clumps of soil caked to his hair and face. His lips parted as if to speak, but only a dry, ragged gasp escaped. Clara reached for her grocery bag, fumbling until she found a small bottle of water. She tilted it carefully, letting drops moisten his mouth, watching as he tried to swallow. His throat convulsed, and then he coughed, a harsh sound that made her jolt. The cough was good. It meant his body was fighting. She encouraged him, patting his chest, her voice steadying as she repeated, "You're okay, keep breathing, just keep breathing." The words were more for her than for him, but they filled the darkness with something other than silence. Clara slipped her arms beneath his shoulders, straining to lift him upright. He was heavy, his body limp, but she dragged him until his back rested against the base of a tree. His head lolled to one side, and she caught it, holding him steady, refusing to let him sink again. Every sound of the forest seemed louder now, the distant owl, the rustle of unseen creatures, each noise a reminder that she was exposed. Her mind painted images of footsteps approaching, of unseen eyes watching. She shoved the fear down and focused on the man before her. His hand twitched suddenly, fingers brushing against her wrist. She froze, staring at him, watching the slow flutter of his eyelids. His skin was icy cold, but the slight movement jolted her with renewed determination. He wasn't gone, not yet. Clara gripped his hand firmly, grounding him, grounding herself. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Should she call for help? Her phone had one bar of service at best in this part of the woods. Could she even explain this without sounding insane? That she'd found a man buried alive, but hesitation was dangerous. She wiped more dirt from his face, her breathing ragged, whispering again, "Hold on, you're safe, just hold on." The man's chest rose a little fuller this time, his breathing shaky but deeper than before. Clara leaned closer, her ear near his lips, straining to catch any sound. His cracked mouth parted again, and this time there was something more than a gasp. A whisper, faint, broken, but carrying weight. Words she wasn't ready for. Clara leaned in, every nerve in her body strung tight. Her breath held as though the sound of it might drown out the fragile words forming on his lips. The man's voice was almost imperceptible, a rasp carried on the shallow air he managed to pull into his lungs. She pressed her ear closer, her hand steadying his jaw, desperate to catch the meaning hidden in the broken syllables. At first, it was just fragment, syllables cut short, a language of pain and weakness. Then she heard it clearly enough to chill her blood, a name, not hers, but one she recognized, her son's. He whispered it again, faint but undeniable, the way someone speaks a secret meant only for one person. Clara froze, her body stiffening, her heart crashing against her ribs as though trying to break free. How could this stranger, this half-buried man in the woods, know her little boy's name? She pulled back just enough to search his face, wiping more soil from his cheeks, staring at his features as though they might suddenly reveal an answer. His eyes fluttered open, glazed but focused, and in that hollow stare she felt the weight of something far larger than coincidence pressing down on her. "Say it again," she urged, her voice trembling, more command than plea. "What did you say?" His lips parted, and with another shallow breath the same sound escaped, unmistakable. He wasn't delirious, not muttering random nonsense. He knew. Clara's thoughts spun wildly. She clutched his collar, shaking him lightly, desperate for clarity. "How do you know that name? Tell me." But his head fell sideways again, his strength failing, the whisper dissolving into a weak groan. Her chest tightened, panic threatening to consume her, but she forced herself to breathe, to think. Maybe she had misheard. Maybe exhaustion and fear had twisted the sounds in her ears. Yet the certainty in her gut told her otherwise. It was too clear, too pointed. This man carried knowledge of her life, of her child, something no stranger buried in the woods should ever possess. The forest around her seemed to draw closer, shadows pressing in, the air colder. Clara felt exposed, as though her son's very name had summoned unseen forces into the night. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the dark tree line, half expecting figures to emerge from the blackness. No one appeared, but her paranoia refused to ease. The man stirred again, his hand twitching weakly in the dirt, his mouth moving with effort. Clara leaned close once more, her ear brushing against his lips. The next words were softer but strung together, a broken phrase that carried weight like a stone. She caught pieces. Danger, protect, don't trust. Her throat constricted, her body trembling as she pieced them together. She wanted to demand answers, to shake him back into coherence, but his strength was gone, his head lolling forward. Still, the fragments echoed in her mind, burrowing deep. He hadn't just whispered her son's name. He had warned her, pleaded with her, given her something she couldn't unhear. And with every beat of her heart, the certainty grew that her life and her child's had been pulled into something she didn't yet understand. Clara's arms trembled as she held the stranger upright against the tree, the weight of his words still echoing in her skull. The warning, the mention of her son's name, had cracked the night open into something unrecognizable. She wanted to believe she had misheard, but the look in his half-shut eyes, the urgency in his fading whisper, told her otherwise. He hadn't been speaking nonsense. He had spoken directly to her life, her family, her only reason for enduring the long nights of work and the empty cupboards. Her mind swirled with impossible questions, but her body refused to collapse under them. She had no choice but to act. She rummaged through the grocery bag again, desperate for anything to revive him further. Her hands landed on a small pack of crackers, half broken inside their wrapper. She tore it open, crumbling one against his lips, but his mouth barely moved. His energy was draining fast, and all she could do was keep him conscious, keep him from slipping into the silence that threatened with every shallow breath. Then, as though pulled from some reserve of fading strength, his hand reached out, clutching her wrist with surprising force. Clara's eyes widened at the sudden grip. His mouth moved, and though the words came fractured, she caught them. "You don't understand." He pressed something into her palm, rough and cold, before his hand fell limp again. She opened her fingers slowly, the faint glow of her phone's flashlight catching on a small, metallic object, a key. Not just any key, but ornate, heavy, with strange markings etched into the surface. Clara stared at it, confusion wrapping tighter around her. A buried man in the woods, whispering her child's name, pressing a key into her hand. It felt unreal, but the weight of the object was undeniable. It was not symbolic, not a delirious gesture. It was intentional. He had given her something important, something he couldn't explain with words. Her breathing quickened as she turned the key over in her fingers. It didn't look like one meant for a house or a car. It was old-fashioned, the kind of key that belonged to a safe, or perhaps a box that held things better kept hidden. Why would he give this to her? Why not keep it himself? Unless... Clara's pulse spiked with realization. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This wasn't a random man she had saved from a shallow grave. Whatever his story was, she was now woven into it, pulled into a current she had no way of resisting. The warning he whispered, the key in her hand, the weight of his gaze, all of it connected into a truth she couldn't yet see but felt was looming just ahead. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying a distant creak that made her whip her head around. A sound, faint but deliberate, like a branch stepped on by a boot. She tightened her grip on the key, her body coiling with fear and defiance. Whoever had buried this man might not be far, and now she held something they could very well be searching for. Clara's hand clenched around the ornate key, as if it were the only solid thing left in her unraveling world. The man's breathing rasped beside her, shallow but steady enough to remind her he was still alive. She crouched lower, shielding him with her body as though she could protect him from the unseen eyes she felt pressing in from the woods. Every creak of the branches, every whisper of the wind scraped her nerves raw. Her mind replayed the fragments he had whispered, her son's name, the warning, the plea. None of it made sense, yet it carried too much weight to dismiss as delirium. He knew something about her life, something he shouldn't, and the key now burning against her palm was proof that whatever connected them was deliberate. Clara wanted to scream at him, to demand explanations, but his eyes were half closed, his lips cracked and still. He had already given her more than she was prepared to carry. She slipped the key into her jacket pocket, the metal pressing cool against her chest. The act felt treacherous, as though she had accepted a burden meant for someone else. But she couldn't abandon him, not after digging him out of the earth, not after hearing her child's name fall from his broken voice. Whether she wanted it or not, their fates had become tangled. "Why, my son?" she whispered under her breath, more to herself than to him. The question hung in the night, unanswered, heavy as stone. She looked at his face, smeared with mud and streaked with sweat, and noticed something she hadn't before. A scar running along his jaw, faint but precise, the kind of mark left by surgery or violence. His suit, though filthy, was tailored, the fabric finer than anything she had ever touched. This man had once belonged to a world far from hers, yet here he was, reduced to a half-buried secret in the dirt. Her phone buzzed faintly, startling her. A single bar of reception. She considered calling for help, but her thumb hovered over the screen, paralyzed. What would she say? That she had found a wealthy stranger buried alive, who whispered warnings about her son. That she now carried a key that might unlock something dangerous. No one would believe her. Worse, whoever had left him here might be listening, waiting for the first sign of movement. The man stirred again, his voice rasping out something almost too faint to catch. Clara bent closer, straining, her ear nearly brushing his lips. This time his words formed more clearly, though halting. No, you. Her blood ran cold. He coughed, the sound tearing from his chest, and she steadied him, whispering for him to save his strength. But the words were already carved into her mind. They know you. Not just her son, not just a coincidence, her. Clara's pulse thundered, her thoughts racing toward every possible meaning. Whoever had hunted this man, whoever had buried him alive, was connected to her existence. The secrets he carried were not his alone anymore. They were hers too, and she had no way of refusing them. Clara's chest ached from the weight of every word the stranger had given her. They know you. It wasn't just warning, it was revelation. The forest pressed in tighter, shadows deepening, the silence between the trees too deliberate to ignore. She felt it now, an unseen presence in the night, as though the woods themselves were watching her choices. The man's body trembled weakly against her arm. His voice rasped again, almost inaudible, yet sharp enough to slice through her thoughts. Take the key. Trust no one. His fingers twitched, curling around her sleeve as if anchoring her to his plea. Then, with a long exhale, his grip loosened. His eyes closed not in death, but in a fragile surrender to exhaustion. Clara's instinct screamed at her to run, to carry her son far away from whatever storm this man had dragged into her life. Yet as she looked down at him, this millionaire reduced to a broken secret, she knew it wasn't that simple. Leaving him here would be leaving herself unguarded. She was already inside the web, already chosen, already seen. The key in her pocket seemed heavier now, as though it carried not just metal but responsibility. She didn't know what it unlocked or why it mattered, but she understood it was part of something vast enough to endanger lives. His life, her child's. A rustle from the tree line made her spin, heart hammering. For one breathless moment, she was sure she saw movement, a silhouette slipping between the trunks. She reached for her phone, but the screen glowed with emptiness, no service. Her pulse pounded as she crouched lower, shielding the man, scanning the darkness. The figure never reappeared, but the warning had been clear. They weren't alone. Time fractured into urgency. Clara hoisted the stranger higher, his weight crushing against her back as she dragged him along the narrow path leading out of the woods. Every step was a battle, her muscles screaming, her breath ragged. But the image of her son waiting at home, unaware of the danger now circling their lives, gave her strength. She could not let him face this alone. When the glow of a distant streetlight finally broke through the branches, Clara nearly collapsed with relief. The town was close. Safety, at least for the moment, was close. She staggered forward, forcing her body to keep moving until the trees opened into the dirt road leading to the main street. The man groaned softly, his voice stirring once more. Clara bent down, her ear near his lips. This time the whisper came with startling clarity. "You saved me. Now they'll come for you. Protect him." Clara's throat tightened. She wanted to demand answers, but his strength had already faded again. She looked at him, then at the key pressing like fire against her chest. Her life had changed in a single night, and there was no undoing it. She was no longer just a mother fighting for her son's survival in the quiet struggle of poverty. She was the guardian of something greater, the keeper of a secret powerful enough to bury men alive. And as she lifted her eyes to the horizon, holding the key as tightly as she held her resolve, Clara understood the truth. Their lives were now bound together, not by chance, but by destiny, hers, her son's, and the man she had pulled from the earth. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as one, their fates forever intertwined.